Hi, I'm Karen. We're here at Montavilla Sewing Center, and today we're talking about the Bernette b33. In this video, we're going to get started sewing. So to start out with, we have, if you want to do just a straight stitch, and most of the time that's what most people want to do with their sewing machine, just a straight stitch. We want stitch number A here. So use your selector, and you can move your selector to wherever you need it to be, but stitch A is what we want for straight stitching. And then a normal stitch length, this is stitch length, is about 2.5, between 2 and 3. Now if you're doing basting, which is a long stitch they can easily remove, then you want to have this up at 4. And if you're doing buttonholes, which are really short stitches, there is where you move it to less than 1. One way to help remember that this is stitch length is look over here. You can see a line that's shorter and longer. That's stitch length. Okay, to start out with, we got a couple pieces of fabric here. We're going to put it under the foot. Now let's say we want a 5/8 inch seam allowance. That's the distance between the stitch line and the edge of the fabric. Put your edge of your fabric right there at the 5/8 inch line on the needle plate. And when you start to sew, and I remember your presser foot levers right here. When you start to sew, make sure you're sewing on the fabric, not off the fabric. And when you end, you want to end before you get to the edge of the fabric. The reason for that is if you're sewing with no fabric there, you're liable to get a thread tangle, and you don't want that. So start sewing like maybe a 1/4 inch away from the edge of the fabric. So I'm going to line this up right about there, okay? And then the thread tails, another way to help prevent thread tangles is for the first 2 stitches, just keep your finger right here on the thread tails. Now I'm going to do a back stitch at the beginning and the ending of the seam to make sure that those stitches don't come unstitched. This is the back stitch lever. When you push this down, make sure you push it all the way down. That's going to give you your full back stitch. Okay, so start stitching a couple stitches, and then we can let go of those threads. And now I'm going to push this down, and remember not to sew off the edge of the fabric. Now where I'm going to watch is the edge of the fabric and this line. That's where I'm going to watch as I sew. Getting close to the end, stop about there, push this down, go back, push it forward. Now I'm going to roll the hand wheel so that this comes up so I can see it. It just kind of peeks up there. It's called the take-up lever. The purpose of the take-up lever is to take up the slack in the thread. As the needle goes down, it's going to form a loop of thread that's pulled around the bobbin. The take-up lever takes up that slack and forms a nice, neat stitch. So it's completed that stitch. We can take this out, cut our thread over here on the thread cutter on the side, and there is our nice 5/8 inch seam. Let's test it out to make sure. Here I have my seam gauge at 5/8 of an inch, and from the edge to the seam is 5/8 of an inch. That's how you sew a straight stitch seam, doing back stitch and sealing the end of your seam. Now I'm going to show you how to do a zigzag. Okay, zigzag is this one right here, C. Now notice between C and B, there's a little bit of difference. You kind of click it along, whereas the other two is just a straight click. That's how you make your zigzag wider or narrower. I'm going to show you how that works. So to start out with, let's do a little bit of a zigzag. Also, you can do a back stitch on your zigzag too. That's okay. Okay, now at this point, whenever you change this, make sure your needle's up out of your fabric. It doesn't need to be all the way up, but at least not touching the fabric. That's important because when you change this, your needle is going different places. If it's down in the fabric and you change your stitch selection, you could end up breaking or bending your needle when you start sewing again. So make it a habit, before you change this, make sure that needle's up. Okay, now I'm going to make this halfway between C and B. And then I'm going to put it all the way over here to B. Now, one thing that you can do if you want to check your stitches while you're still sewing, you don't want to lose your place, lower your needle down into your fabric, lift up the presser foot, and you can move your fabric to the side. You can see how the stitch is wider here, narrower, and here it's all the way down to just sewing on the left-hand side. That's what B is. So I'm going to put this back up to the widest stitch, but now I'm going to shorten my stitch length. Let's say you want to do applique. Applique is where you have two contrasting pieces of fabric, your base fabric, and the top maybe a leaf or a flower that you want to stitch around the edges of so that it doesn't fray. So you shorten your stitch length, you use a zigzag. Now I'm just going to do this with just fabric. I'm not going to use a separate piece of fabric here. Okay. And then I can make that a little narrower. I think I'm going to do that about like this. Okay. So this is what's called a satin stitch. And it's just a zigzag that I've made shorter using the stitch length knob. Okay, so that is your basic sewing, basic how to do. Oh, I want to show you one more thing. You might be wondering, what is this red thing? How do you get, and what is it for? That's to access all these red stitches. So I'm going to show you one stitch in that before we get away here. I'm going to go back to A, which is this. But when you're in this, the same letters apply, but now they apply to these down here. So I'm going to do stitch A, but this is what it's called, a triple stitch. It's really good for sewing things that need extra reinforcement in the stitches. So rather than using extra strong thread, we can use regular thread, but it's going to give you 3 layers rather than just one strand of thread. It's especially good for, because it stretches, you can sew things on the bias. That would be like pants crotches or the backs of armholes or anywhere where the fabric is slightly on the bias. Okay, let me go from this side so you can kind of see it better. I'm sewing it on the bias, so watch what it does. I'll try to go slow here. See how it does a backward stitch? It goes 2 forward and 1 backward. Now I'm going really slow, and remember, with your foot control, if you just press it a little, it'll go slower. If you press it faster, press it harder, it goes faster. So you have control using the pedal down there for how fast it goes. Okay, remember when we stop, that's got to peak up there. Oh, by the way, if it stops and it's way high like this, your needle's already starting to come down. You can move your hand wheel a little bit, about 5 degrees backwards. It's okay. Just don't crank it the wrong way. If you do that, you're going to get another thread tangle. So if you're going to hand walk your stitches, make sure you turn the hand wheel towards you or counterclockwise. You can end it right there. Okay, cut those threads. And that's a nice stretchy stitch, which is going to stretch a lot more than just this straight stitch like this here. That's the advantage of that stitch, really useful. These other stitches are useful for things, or they can be decorative stitches too. Get back into straight stitching. All we have to do is turn the stitch length dial to between 2 and 3, and we're ready to roll for regular stitching. I hope that you found this to be a helpful video. If you have, give us a thumbs up. And if you have comments or questions, you can leave those in the area down below. We have lots of other videos on our Montavilla YouTube channel, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Bye.